Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. In this podcast, Green Socialist Notes is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on in 2020. So I think we need to talk about Palestine and Ukraine again. There are a lot of parallels. And then this COP climate summit that just ended in Brazil, among many topics we could address. But earlier this week, the UN Security Council approved Trump's so-called peace plan for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the vote on the Security Council was 13 yes and 2 abstentions from Russia and China. They could have stopped this colonization plan, but they chose to let it go forward. Israel and Hamas objected, but they had no vote. And the plan authorizes an international stabilization force to police Gaza during reconstruction under a so-called Board of Peace, which will be chaired by Donald Trump. It says a reformed Palestinian Authority will qualify to replace the Board of Peace when it has adopted the reforms that the Board of Peace deems it needs to adopt. And the resolution says when that happens, those conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. But that seems very unlikely given who's going to be in charge of this Board of Peace and the fact that the so-called ceasefire has not resulted in a stop to Israeli killings of Palestinians. It hasn't resulted in sufficient aid going into Gaza. And even though it's not part of the agreement, it hasn't stopped the continuing attacks on Palestinians by settlers with the Israeli Defense Force backing them on Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, this international stabilization force, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, and Indonesia, has said they're interested in being a part of it. But Hamas and the other Palestinian armed resistance groups denounced that because they oppose any foreign military intervention, which would mean the protection force to end genocide and protect the Palestinians that many Greens have advocated. That's different than a stabilization force. It's to go in there and protect Palestinians, has been sidelined by this resolution. President Petro of Colombia said he would introduce it, but whatever, I don't know what happened behind closed doors in the UN and the Security Council, but there's no report of any effort by the General Assembly to adopt a Uniting for Peace proposal to bring a protection force, not just a stabilization force, stabilization of colonization, but a protection force for the Palestinians. There's no reporting that that's moving in the General Assembly, although that is what advocates of that, like Craig Mokhiber, who's been at the center of these efforts to get the protection force in, is still calling for. But, it doesn't look likely that it's going to happen. Now, Hamas has said they're not going to disarm. They told the Egyptian mediators that if there was a real ceasefire, they would agree to have their heavy weapons dismantled and stockpiled inside Gaza under the supervision of Egypt and the Palestinian Authority, but only if Israel fully withdraws its forces from Gaza and there is a credible path to a Palestinian state. And those conditions don't exist. And even in that case, Hamas's military wing suggested to Egyptian mediators that they should be able to retain personal firearms for their self-defense. But the killing goes on, the aid's not coming in, the genocide continues, the ethnic cleansing on the West Bank continues. And so we have a colonization plan backed by the UN Security Council, with the so-called anti-imperialist states of Russia and China standing aside. it's a disaster, and the Palestinians are not getting the support internationally that they need. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And then this week it leaked to the press as the scandal on corruption in Ukraine was unfolding, and it looked weak, that there's a 28-point peace plan. It's similar in a lot of ways to the 20-point peace plan Trump had for Palestine. This is for Ukraine. And I mean, this is the crassest imperialist bullying. Trump says Ukraine has to sign off on it by Thanksgiving next Thursday, or else. And the or else is the U.S. will stop sharing satellite intelligence on Russian military positions and assets. It's really the only military aid the U.S. still provides. And will stop selling arms to Ukraine via European buyers. So Trump's saying to Ukraine, this is a done deal. You take it or else you get no support from us, the U.S. Direct military aid was cut by Trump when he came into office, but they've been selling arms to European buyers, but it's been small, less than $2 billion over the whole year, when what Ukraine needs is on the order of 30 or $40 billion worth of weapons and military aid, like they were getting in the previous 3 years. So, and then on Friday, yesterday, the secondary sanctions on countries doing business with the Russian oil giants Lukoil and Rosneft were supposed to go into effect, but they didn't. And the peace proposal is the excuse. Trump's saying, well, let's not impose sanctions while we're negotiating this peace deal. So some of the 28 points include Ukraine gives Russia the parts of the Donbass, that's Donetsk and Luhansk Oblasts, that are controlled by Ukraine. And then Ukraine accepts that Russia controls the territories it seized by force. Ukraine is expected to cut its military forces down by more than half. Ukraine can have no NATO or any military allies, and no foreign troops stationed inside Ukraine to protect them from further aggression. The U.S. ends all military assistance to Ukraine. It ends sanctions on Russia, and the U.S. and Russian oligarchs then resume business as usual with each other. There's amnesty for war criminals, and there's a quote-unquote peace council chaired by Donald Trump to oversee the implementation. So Russia's war of aggression is rewarded with territory it seized by military force, and is rewarded with bonus territory in the Donbass that Ukraine still controls. And it's like, this is a real estate deal. It's characteristic of Trump. Russia's going to pay some kind of rent for that additional bonus territory. And then Russia gets amnesty for its many war crimes, from the supreme war crime of aggression, from which all the other war crimes flow, that include the abduction of thousands of Ukrainian children, the bombardment of civilian residences and infrastructure hundreds of miles from the battlefront, the quote-unquote human safaris of Russian FPV drones, first-person view drones. The operators in the Russian military can see who they're killing, and they've been executing Ukrainian civilians and then boasting about it on snuff films they post online. Amnesty for that. And then the crimes of the occupation, the detention, torture, rape, deportation to Siberia, or simply execution of people who remain loyal to Ukraine in the occupied territories. It calls for Ukraine to cap its military forces at 600,000, but there are no limits on Russian military forces. Limits or no foreign troops on Ukrainian territory to support their defense, but no limits on Russian troops in Ukrainian occupied territory, and so on. So this is a plan for the defeat of Ukraine and gives Russia much of what it demands. And, as I said, characteristically, it's framed as a real estate and business deal. like the rent for the remainder of the Donbass, and the promise of sanctions relief to Russia and the resumption of business as usual. So what's happening today is the European states, leaders are meeting at the G8 summit. They're going to be talking about this on the sidelines. It wasn't on the agenda. The U.S. won't be there, like they weren't at the COP meeting. Wait, we're talking, am I getting the G8 or the G20 mixed up? I'm losing track. But anyway, the Europeans are meeting today. And then tomorrow in Geneva, Ukrainian and U.S. officials will meet. And I think what we'll see is Ukraine will try to delay and say we got to work out the details. And Russia's going to do the same. They say they like the plan, but the details have to be worked out. So there won't be an agreement on a plan, but the upshot is Russia's aggression will continue, but now the U.S. will have eliminated the last remnants of support for Ukraine. So Ukraine is on its own, hopefully with European allies providing more support, but they can't even get together on how to use the frozen assets of Russia sitting in European institutions as collateral for reparations loans, as they call them, to help Ukraine. They haven't pledged money. The military aid they've talked about is coming in slow, insufficiently. So, Europe, I think, it's amazing they haven't realized what a difficult situation they're in. So we'll see what happens. And then today, the climate summit in Belém, Brazil wrapped up, and it closed with no carbon emissions commitments. And I mean, it was amazing. The petrostates, including Saudi Arabia and Russia, and the world's largest fossil fuel consumers, China and India, rejected a proposed final statement that called for a transition away from fossil fuels, the burning of which and the carbon in the atmosphere is the primary cause of global warming. And about 80 countries joined them, and no doubt due to threats and arm twisting by the Saudis, the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, and the Americans, even though they weren't there, but that's what these countries know. And by the thousands of lobbyists from corporations present. There were more lobbyists from the corporations in the fossil fuel industry than there were delegates to the damn climate summit. And the reactionary Arab monarchies were, blatantly open and vocal in opposing a transition away from fossil fuels. So, basically all the countries that lined up with the petrostates and big consumers were told that do as we say or we wreck your economy by withholding trade and loans and investments. So there's a lot of coercion going on. As I said, the U.S. didn't even send an official delegation, but their presence was known because the U.S., uses that kind of arm twisting to get countries to do their bidding. Now, half of the conference, about another 80 countries, were for a statement that would include a transition away from fossil fuels. But the statement adopted today, and there must have been some little compromises. So I don't know what the vote was, if there was a vote, or it's just, here's the consensus compromise, but it doesn't even have the words fossil fuels or oil, gas, or coal in it. It says nothing, and this is a defeat for Brazil that hosted it. There was supposed to be some action to protect the Amazon and prevent deforestation. Nothing about that. So, the states that are unhappy with this are scattered across Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Pacific, and Europe, including the UK, France, Germany, and Sweden. They wanted a transition away. In the Americas, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Guatemala rejected the pro-fossil fuels drafts. But what this means is that the big authoritarian states that are the world's biggest producers and consumers of fossil fuels are refusing to transition away from fossil fuels. They are going to burn up the planet. So what does that mean for us? We've got to refocus our energy here in the U.S., and people like Greens and other countries need to do the same to build support for an eco-socialist and global Green New Deal for a rapid transition away from fossil fuels and to an economy that enacts an economic Bill of Rights to meet the needs of all within ecological limits. That's the signature issue of the U.S. Green Party, and we need to, bring that to the fore. And of course, the U.S. is key to all this because our economic size and geopolitical power is so great. And an example of eco-socialist transformation here at the heart of fossil fuel capitalism would inspire and enable eco-socialist transformations in other countries. So, our focus should be on building the Green Party to the point where we have the power to implement a Green New Deal. And I'm talking about a real Green New Deal, not this watered down version that progressive Democrats like AOC have put before the Congress as a non-binding resolution. It eliminated the military spending cuts that we called for to help finance the Green New Deal and to make our relations to other countries based on aid, not threats from military. It eliminated the phase out of nuclear power. It eliminated the ban on new fossil fuel infrastructure, because once that infrastructure is built, the investors expect it to be used for decades, and so on. So, in the Green Party, we need to advance real solutions to the crises of war, climate, and growing inequality. And I think the Green New Deal still should be at the center of that. And we've got to, define what we mean by that and say, what the Democrats are talking about is, half-assed, and we need the real deal. And I think we have our work cut out for us. So I'll stop there. Didn't go on as long this week. There's a lot more we could talk about, but I'm sure you'll prompt me on your questions and comments. Scout 164, with Marguerite Taylor Greene resigning and the GOP undergoing a civil war, is there any possible area for the Greens to fill in for politics? Or is it because of the anti-socialism resolution making it impossible? Well, the Republicans and I think it was 80 Democrats in the House just voted on a stupid resolution condemning socialism in any form. That's just performative politics, so people have something to talk about with their constituents. I don't think that makes it impossible. I mean, I think Mamdani shows that if you make social, and Bernie Sanders has done this, if you say you're a socialist, but then advocate concrete reforms that people say, yeah, we could do that. Like in Mamdani's case, fast and free public buses, universal child care, and a freeze on rents in rent-regulated apartments, which is about half of New York City. And people in New York City said, yeah, we could do that. It's not pie in the sky. And Bernie Sanders, Medicare for All, was his signature issue. And that has been popular ever since it first was proposed by Truman. It's always had majority support. So, socialists advocating socialistic reforms like that is definitely possible. In fact, it's, good politics. It's popular with the people. Now, is there a civil war going on in the GOP? Yeah, there probably is. It seems to be fracturing. Marjorie Taylor Greene just said she's not running for re-election. She's resigning, in fact, she'll be out of there by January 5th. I'm not sure what that means. I think we probably have not heard the last of that woman. She has a version of right-wing populism that is actually more genuine than Trump's, who's a oligarch. She's more closer to a regular person and seems to have some concern for what people are going through with their healthcare costs and the loss of food stamps. Trump doesn't give a damn about that. So, whether she can build a faction on the right that is, sort of right-wing cultural politics, but with some economic populism, that could have some legs and could split the current coalition in the GOP under Trump. But we'll have to see how that develops. The other scenario is Marjorie Taylor Greene, disappears over the horizon, and some other Republicans that shared her views and or wanted to cross Trump but thought they couldn't, they just melt away, and the Republicans become even more decidedly a neo-fascist party that is culturally reactionary as well as economically corrupt. I mean, the corruption of the Trump administration is unbelievable. I mean, he's using his office to do a pump and dump scheme with one of his cryptocurrencies, the Strump, I forget. I think that's some. I haven't got all the terms correct on cryptocurrency yet. And then he just on paper made $5 billion in a single day when they publicly issued the World Financial Liberty coin. And he's using the office of presidency and influence peddling to get, countries like the UAE to put $2 billion into that coin to increase his personal wealth. And his sons and the Witkoffs, Stephen Witkoff, his real estate buddy and golfing buddy, and his son are making hundreds of millions. And then Trump has gutted, white collar crime enforcement, public corruption, foreign bribery, you name it. In the Justice Department and the FBI, they don't do that anymore. All they do is go after immigrants to deport them. And then you got Trump, pardoning all these white collar crooks, including this guy that made a big investment in one of his cryptocurrencies, and or dropping the charges against Eric Adams, the corrupt mayor of New York City, in return for Adams cooperating on federal immigration enforcement. It's unbelievable. And, what strikes me is we've got these self-righteous, pro-Russian, anti-Ukraine people, screaming about the corruption scandal in Ukraine, which, what happened there was the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, NABU, brought forward charges. And so anti-corruption enforcement is happening in Ukraine. And the scale, they're talking about $100 million. We're talking about personal wealth for Trump of billions. And it didn't start with Trump. Look at all the bank fraud and predatory lending that, stole people's savings and wealth and homes, millions of homes during the financial crisis of 2008. And then in the aftermath, the banks got bailed out and we got sold out. There was only one banker that did any time in prison for those crimes. And so that was under Obama and under the first Trump administration, where those white collar criminals got away with their thefts. So that's a whole nother thing that's really not being talked about much. The level of corruption here is unprecedented. And, so when people get self-righteous about, Ukraine is corrupt, therefore we shouldn't support them, they should first start, let's worry about our country. And secondly, the fact that these people were apparently caught and alleged to have committed these crimes and are going through their, judicial system, their criminal justice system, is a positive for Ukraine. They're rooting out corruption, which is one of the big legacies of the revolution in 2014. There was anti-authoritarian, anti-violence from the Yanukovych regime, and also anti-corruption. Yanukovych stole, the Ukrainians blind. I think they figured the total was 37 billion, by, procurement, skimming, kickbacks like in this current scandal, but also just straight out taking money out of the public budget. So Ukraine is improving on corruption, and we're getting worse. And I'm really sick of hearing all these anti-Ukraine people say, see, they're not worth supporting. It shows no empathy for what the Ukrainians are going through. I mean, at the beginning of this week, a precision-guided cruise missile hit an apartment block in Ternopil, which is about 500 miles from the battle lines in the east. And that's like the distance from New York City to Detroit. And, you know, they're targeting civilians 500 miles from the front lines. That's a war crime. That's terrorism. But these people are getting all righteous about corruption in Ukraine, you know, say nothing about that, let alone express any sympathy and condolences. So anyway, I got off the question somewhat, but that's been one of the things on my mind this week. Jack V. Lucas. The left should use an all of the above strategy, supporting Greens if they're the only ones who'll step up, and supporting primary challengers like Chio Say, who's about to take on Hakeem Jeffries. Interesting, I got an email from somebody asking me about what I thought about that. I think as the Green Party, we should be supporting Greens. And if, you know, Chio Say wants to be part of the Democratic Party coalition, which is dominated by corporate neoliberals, he's going to be entangled in that. And we should be supporting candidates who want to, you know, replace that, which is why we need independent left politics. Now, he is, Chio Say is going before there's a vote going on now in New York City DSA on whether to endorse him. And that vote will be completed today. If they don't endorse him, what's Chio Say going to do? Is he going to run anyway in a primary challenge to Hakeem Jeffries? Is he going to drop out? He's going to run an independent campaign against Hakeem Jeffries. If he did the latter, you know, Greens in New York City should definitely be talking to him. Although I have to say, in New York City and in too many other cities, the Greens are not organized enough, active enough on issues, running their own candidates enough to be taken seriously by, you know, somebody like Chio Say, who's got elected to the city council. So I don't think Greens, look, people like Chio Say are getting enough support that they can run their primary challenges inside the Democratic Party, and, you know, good luck. But once they're elected, they're going to be entangled with the corporate neoliberals who dominate the Democratic Party. You know, I think that's why you see people like AOC telling and Zoran Mamdani telling Chio Say not to run against Jeffries, because they're trying to be accepted in that coalition dominated by the corporate neoliberals. And that's not our politics. So we need to, you know, basically tend to our own politics. And that's not to say, you know, we can't work with people like Chio Say when they're in office. You know, I have written articles trying to, you know, instigate, you know, AOC to take up the question of proportional representation. There's a bill in Congress. She's not endorsed it. To take up the case for a national health service, not just Medicare for all, which is not enough, given that it's not just the insurance, but the whole healthcare delivery system, the hospitals and everything from ambulances to funeral service has been taken over by big Wall Street firms that extract profit and make things more costly. You can't have real cost control under national health insurance like Medicare for all now, because the private for-profit entities will just feed at that public trough. So I've written appeals that mention AOC in Ralph Nader's Capitol Hill Citizen, which is hand-delivered to all the congressional offices. I don't know if she actually read it, if her staff read it, but, you know, I think we should be making appeals like that and trying to, you know, get them to stand up for the right thing. You know, just to take another example, she's the one that took the Green New Deal slogan from the Greens. And we know she took it from the Greens. She was campaigning for a Green who was running on the Green New Deal the year before she was elected to Congress. And it's really deceitful of her when she did that little Instagram video about Jill Stein saying, you guys never run local candidates. She knows full well we do. She campaigned for one. So that kind of hypocrisy is, infuriating. But by the same token, her politics are pretty progressive. And, I think we should keep the door open to her, but not take any BS from her, like, the Jill Stein video or her discouraging progressive challengers to corporate Democrats, which she herself was, and had support from the Justice, what do they call themselves, the Justice Democrats. And now she's discouraging those kind of primary challenges. She's been co-opted. And so that's one of the things that happens when you're entangled in the Democratic Party coalition. She, to this day, cannot get on the committee she wants in Congress. Nancy Pelosi and the other leaders of the Democratic Party in the House, she wanted to be on the committee that dealt with energy issues so she could talk about the Green New Deal. And, she was prevented, and they had one election and most of the Democrats elected somebody else who was really a tool for the insurance industry or the energy industry. So, what I'm saying is we need to focus on developing our own candidates and keep the door open to people like Chiosei if they get frustrated with, what the Democratic Party power structure puts in their way. Scout 164, Howie, any thoughts on Trump's investigation to stop the Epstein file release? I'm not sure that will be very effective because the victims and their lawyers have unedited copies of the files as well. You're a little deeper into the weeds than I am. I have heard that, Trump's called for investigation of Democrats like Bill Clinton. And people say that will prevent the release of files that would affect that investigation. And I'm just not sure, how far that's going. I know they have 30 days in the Justice Department to release the files. And then, the victims and the lawyers have unedited copies of the files. That I didn't know that, but I guess it would, if it pertains to their cases, they would at least have access to some of the files in the disclosure that prosecutors or defendants, in this case, the Justice Department, have to provide. But can they release them to the public, or is that violating some, legal requirement? I don't know. But I do think more of these files are coming out, and I suspect Trump is in deep trouble in some of these files, and that's why he's been so reluctant to see them come out. Some people say it's, donors and friends, but I think, Trump, he really just cares about himself. So I think he's afraid of what some of those files say about him. And I hope they do see the daylight and the victims get their, justice, and the guilty people get their comeuppance. At war with dust. Trump touted cheaper gas several times in his press conference with Mamdani. Should Mamdani have used that opportunity to talk about climate change? And what do you think of the moment in general? Well, in general, I think Trump genuinely had some respect for Mamdani, because it's like, game recognizes game. And Trump, I think, admires how Mamdani came from nowhere to be Cuomo. And so Trump thinks, this guy's got something on the ball. Maybe I should not, be so hostile to him. For Mamdani, it's very defensive. Trump could make life as mayor in New York City very difficult between, not letting funds that are supposed to be released go to New York City, to sending in, you know, Homeland Security, ICE, Border Patrol, the National Guard, you know, on immigration enforcement. So that's what I think of the moment in general. I haven't seen but a snatch, just a little excerpt of, you know, what they said. I have it on my computer. I haven't had time to look at it. I will. And then should Mamdani have used that opportunity to talk about climate change? I don't think that was the time because, you know, Trump is just not going to respond. So, you know, why antagonism when he can do all these bad things to you? Mamdani has a platform and he can use it to talk about climate change. He doesn't need to do it, you know, standing next to Trump, which could have, you know, negative consequences for him. So, you know, but I hope Mamdani does talk about climate change. He hasn't talked much about it. I think he says a little bit, I forget what he says on his website platform, but it was pretty mild compared to what, you know, a New York City mayor, I think, should be pushing, which is public power, you know, in order to get control of the energy production and distribution system and thereby be able to plan a faster transition to clean energy, which is going to be cheaper. I mean, the cost of solar, wind, batteries is going through the floor. It's cheaper now than any other source of energy, including gas. But the vested interests don't want to go that way, including the utilities, because they have infrastructure like invested in gas distribution. We got a big controversy in New York where we stopped a gas pipeline into New York, and now Governor Hochul has given its approval. And maybe the federal agency has as well, but Hochul has supported it. And of course, and then it's not just the utilities that, you know, have that infrastructure they want to make money off of. It's the landlord class that doesn't want to retrofit their buildings to go to, you know, heat pumps powered by clean energy, clean electricity. But if you own the public power system, then you have the ability to invest in the transition and also finance the on good terms for owners of properties that need to be converted, the purchase of, you know, geothermal in the sense of or air, ground source or air source heat pumps, which are clean. And what you need is the solar and wind power to power them. That's what makes them clean. And owning the public power system would make it a lot easier to do that. And there is a movement in New York for public power. We got a kind of compromise bill passed that basically says the New York Power Authority can build renewable power if no for-profit interests want to do it at a particular site, instead of giving New York Power Authority the right to go out and do it, you know, on their own without waiting for the private sector to say we won't do it there. So it could be stronger, but nonetheless, we've made progress in that area. So, you know, there's a movement, it's organized. DSA has a group, it's leading a coalition for public power. That's something Mamdani could move on, and he would have a lot of support, because even though climate change in public opinion polls is, you know, down the list of top priorities for people, they're more concerned with immediate things like paying a rent. The percentage of people that are concerned about it is very high. So it's a popular issue. So anyway, I hope Mamdani does more on the climate front and, you know, maybe takes on the question of public power at some point. Scott 164, any thoughts on Mamdani meeting Trump? The GOP was hoping Trump would mop the floor with him, but now they're flabbergasted. Could this help pave the way for something, or is Trump stalling? Well, I kind of answered that last time. I think for Trump, it's game recognizes game. You know, Mamdani ran a great campaign, and Trump thinks like, this guy's got a lot on the ball. I don't want to be fighting with him. So I'll be nice to him. And like I said, Mamdani was there basically to defend New York City from the bad things Trump could do to it. So that's what I took away from it. Of course, the GOP, ideologues, want Trump to, go to ideological war with Mamdani, but Trump is not ideological very much. He's about Trump. It's about making money and raising his status and standing among people. And he'd be a socialist if that got him money and standing. So that's my thoughts on that meeting. Vicki Corden, what do you think about nurses and healthcare workers not considered careers? Education department no longer exists. I'm not sure what you're referring to or who is saying nurses and healthcare workers are not on careers. But whoever's saying that is out of their minds. And the education department, they are supposedly farming out its different functions to other agencies, but there's a lot that's not going to get farmed out because that's what the Trump administration is doing. It is destroying social programs. And it doesn't want the people educated because, smart, educated people are not going to, fall as easily for the kind of flim-flams that Trump and his cronies, try to put on us. So, and, we need more nurses. We need more healthcare workers. We need more doctors. And, I mentioned National Health Service. One of the things about the bill that Ron Dellums introduced in 1977, it was written with a lot of input from the Medical Committee for Human Rights, which had started with the, civil rights movement, the Freedom Summer in Mississippi, and they were there to, patch up civil rights workers that were attacked, beaten, and so forth. And they did the same for the anti-Vietnam War movement. And as, doctors and medical practitioners, they knew that the system of private health insurance was a disaster. And they also knew that just having national health insurance, what we call Medicare for all, was not enough. Because as I said earlier, the for-profit sectors would feed it to public trough to fatten their bottom lines. And if that was true in the early 70s when they drafted this bill, it's many times more true today because, all the independent, doctors, small medical practices and independent hospitals and so forth, it's all been corporatized and centralized and monopolized. So, national health insurance they'll be able to, raise their fees and just feed it to public trough. So one of the things of that bill was it really increased medical training. So it was a community-controlled democratic public health service. So people would elect local boards to administer districts. I think the number was 50,000 to 100,000 people. There would be a community health clinic there. And the board would be 2/3 elected by the public, the consumers, and 1/3 by the healthcare workers. And one reason for doing that was to make sure every community had a community health center. One of the problems with the healthcare system is that rural and urban poor neighborhoods don't have it. They are healthcare deserts. So this would have got a, good physical distribution of healthcare delivery. And the next level was a hospital that would serve, I think the number was 500,000 to 1 million. And its board would be elected by the community health boards. And the next level would be, I think it was 5 to 10 million, would be a medical center that had a research university and medical school. So that's where the medical research and the education would happen. And it would be publicly funded. And the idea was to expand the number of doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers we have, people with technical training. And then the fourth level was the national level, and the regional boards where these, medical centers would elect the national board, which would oversee the distribution of funds, which was on a per capita basis, with the provision to provide extra funding to underserved communities until they were leveled up. That's something that I wish Green Party candidates would really campaign on, instead of just limiting it to the slogan Medicare for all. And like I said, Medicare for all is not enough. National health insurance is not enough. We need a national health service where the hospitals and other delivery systems are publicly controlled democratically, and the medical workers are public employees, not in for-profit institutions where they're, depending on their role, either, like doctors trying to get, higher salaries and cutting side deals with drug companies to push certain drugs, or they're nurses who are, struggling through their unions to get reasonable staffing levels. So they're not, trying not assign too many patients to take care of more than they can take good care of. It's been a huge issue for the nurses. So, to not consider people in those occupations having careers is, it's bad for our health, I guess you could say. And education across the board, whether it's health or other fields. It pays off when well-educated people are more productive. They just deliver better for the economy than people who are not well-educated. So that's something we should all be interested in. Scout 164. It sickens me how much Trump wants to make money with Russia. Russia has been our enemy since the Cold War, and their love for the Soviet Union hasn't gone away. There is Trump. Yet money matters over morals. I'll agree with you. That's Trump. So this is one of a four-part question, it looks like. Part 2, I'm glad Zelensky never agreed to this plan, even if he is having to caress Trump's balls so he will forget about this problem down the line. But fuck, it is disgusting. We got this. The worst part about this is that the peace plan wasn't made by a government official. It was made by a businessman from Florida who just visited Ukraine and just likes money. I think that's reference to Stephen Witkoff. And the last part, Ukraine is never called upon to discuss the peace deal. That businessman and the Russian envoy privately made it. Excuse me. It was a Russian guy named Dmitriev. What's his first name? It's escaping me right now. And Stephen Witkoff. They are reported to have spent 3 days in Miami, coming up with this outline. But other reporting says Trump has been on, approving it every step of the way. So I think, some people call it the Witkoff plan. No, this is the Trump plan. And it's really the basic Trump plan he's put forward, maybe 4 or 5, even 6 times since he came into office. And the basic thing is freeze the front lines, give Russia some more land in the Donbass, and let's, end the sanctions and start making money by doing business with each other. And Ukraine is just going to have to deal with that. And of course, Ukraine doesn't want to deal with it. And, so far Putin is like, he's more interested in Ukraine than he is in business. So I don't think this plan is going anywhere. But what Trump's going to do is use it as an excuse to stop sharing satellite intelligence, which is important. That's how Ukraine sees where the Russians are, where they're coming from, and how they've been able to strike Russian military assets, including, oil refineries, which feed and fuel and fund the military machine. So now I'm sure Ukraine has already got backup plans. The Europeans have some capacities. The Japanese do. There's Google Maps. I mean, I'm sure there's ways they can get intelligence that the U.S. has been providing now. The U.S. intelligence satellites, they're top of the line, but Ukraine can probably compensate for that. The weapons, the U.S. has really stopped sending them. It's up to Europe. If Europe doesn't step up, then they got a problem because, if you go back to December 21, when Putin put forward his so-called peace treaties, and what they demanded was that NATO move its military footprint back to where it was before it expanded in 1997, which really means to where it was when Germany reunified in 1990, or was it 91? Anyway, because NATO doesn't have its own armed force. NATO forces are the national military forces of NATO members, and they only operate under NATO command. There is a command structure if there's an agreed upon operation. So what Russia's basically asking is for Poland and the other Eastern European countries that joined NATO and the Baltics to the Baltic states, the three Baltic states, to leave NATO. That's the root cause because Putin wants to restore the sphere of influence, if not the direct colonization of the countries in the former Russian Empire and in the Soviet Union. So that's what comes after Ukraine if Ukraine falls. And Europe sees that, but they can't get their act together, to support Ukraine. It's been not enough. I mean, they have given a lot of financial aid. They've given actually more than the United States has collectively. But it's declined since Trump came into office, and they seem to be having trouble getting their act together. But anyway, I wouldn't see this as Witkoff's plan. It's Trump's plan. Witkoff is Trump's patsy. He's his little buddy who does what Trump wants. And he makes a lot of money of it. He's part of the World Financial Liberty scams, and he's already a billionaire. Witkoff is. So he's doing fine. But, some people act like, well, this is Witkoff's plan and Trump hasn't approved it yet. No, I think Trump knows it inside and out. He was informed about it as it was developed. And but your other point, Ukraine was never called upon to discuss the plan. This was negotiated without Ukraine, and now it's being presented to them as a done deal, and they got to sign off by Thanksgiving Day, or else they lose what's left of U.S. support. It's imperialist bullying. That's what Trump is about. The irony is, I don't think Russia's even going to go for this. They're going to drag it out. Yeah, let's talk. There's no ceasefire in this plan. It's like the plan has to be adopted before they stop shooting. And I don't think that's going to happen. So Russia will continue its aggression, and Ukraine will do the best it can to defend itself. Andrew Hager, Howie, in your most brutally honest yet unbiased opinion, how do you think capitalism would survive without cronyism? Well, I mean, capitalism is about producing something, selling it on the market, and getting more back than you invested. And now cronyism, capitalism is all the incentives for cronyism, because if it helps you, get back more than you invested, you're going to do it within legal limits or without, beyond. So capitalism, like the incentives are all, to be dishonest and cut corners, break laws, if you can get away with it. Because the point is to make money, not deliver goods and services that people need. That's just sort of a step along the way. And, if you can fake it, defraud people, so much the better from the viewpoint of the capitalist investors. And that's what we got now under Trump, with white collar crime not being investigated and prosecuted. Instead, these white collar criminals are getting pardons and clemency from Donald Trump. And I would just say, capitalism, would it thrive without cronyism? What does thriving capitalism mean? For some people, it would mean, okay, the capitalists make money, but the benefits trickle down, jobs and decent wages and, enough taxes to fund good public services. During the post-Depression, post-World War II sort of bargain between labor and capital in North America and Europe, the working class was generally advancing, although the lower realms of it were super exploited. That was the poverty problem that became a big issue in the 60s, despite, pretty good streak of prosperity post-World War II. And capitalism needs that. Marx called it a reserve army of labor. You need a certain level of unemployment to discourage workers from becoming too militant and push their demands too far. But that was an exceptional period. Since the 1970s, what we've had is overinvestment in productive areas where we can produce, everything everybody needs, but that's not profitable. So it becomes financialized, and they make money in all kind of financial schemes. And a lot of that, as we saw in the, Great Recession of 2008, was because of predatory lending and, other forms of financial fraud. So capitalism incentivizes that kind of bad behavior. So that's my honest yet unbiased, brutally honest yet unbiased opinion. Falling Angel TM. I'm meeting with the Ballot Access Committee on December 1st to restart the disbanded Green Party of Arkansas. Do you have any advice for organizing and petitioning for ballot access? Well, in terms of organizing, I would emphasize you've got to build local chapters where people are meeting regularly face to face and being active on issues, and where they can local elections. So you have a real base for the party, and not just a ballot line that people can pop up and say, I'm going to run as a Green. Petitioning for ballot access, I can't remember Arkansas's requirements, but you have more time than, you have a lot of time, as I remember, in Arkansas. Like, there's no time limit, or you have a year or two to collect the signatures, and the signatures are a few thousand. So, I would have a plan with, timetable and goals, and, start early and be steady, and it shouldn't be a problem. So you get your party on the ballot, and then if you're going to maintain it, if you have strongly well-organized locals with candidates who have, run competitive and sometimes winning elections for local office, then you have people with the experience who can run for those state offices. I'm not sure what the requirements are in Arkansas, but in a lot of states, to keep a ballot line, you need to get a certain percentage of the vote for a statewide office. So, you're developing candidates through your local organizing who can do that at the state level. So that's off the top of my head. I'd have to look at the, particular requirements of Arkansas. It's different in all 51 federal jurisdictions, counting the District of Columbia. And I don't have them all in my head. Okay, well, listen, I appreciate the questions. This hour always goes fast. And I'll be here next Saturday. It'll be Thanksgiving weekend, but I'm sure there'll be much to talk about. We'll see what happens with, the meetings between, the Europeans today and the Ukrainians and Americans tomorrow in Geneva, and what else is going to happen. And, The deadline Trump has imposed is on Thanksgiving. So, we can follow up on that. The Palestinian crisis tragedy is continuing, and a lot of domestic issues. So we'll have plenty to talk about. And so I hope everybody, stay active, work in a group. It makes you feel better. And I hope you have a good Thanksgiving with your people. And we'll see you next Saturday.